My interest in games like Devil's Hideout goes back decades, back to when Sierra would diverge from their usual slate of fantasy-oriented fare to give their audience something darker. King's Quest may have been their most capital I important output, but personally I was always more of a Gabriel Knight fellow. So when Devil's Hideout started getting some buzz as the next big horror mystery point-and-click adventure game, my ears perked up and I added it to my wishlist. Now that it's out, and I've had a few days to think about my time with the game, I like to go over what worked for me, what didn't, and whether I can recommend the game wholeheartedly. The setup is simple, but engaging from the get-go. You play as Lauren, a young woman mourning the loss of her sister, who comes to feel as though there's more to her untimely passing than meets the eye. It spoils nothing to say her search for answers leads her to uncovering unsavory truths about our world, and while it's not the most original setup, countless books, films, and games have used this sort of starting point to head in wildly different directions, and the eerie atmosphere conjured by the visuals, acting, and overall tone do a solid job of initially selling Devil's Hideout as something special. What's most respectable about this game is its semblance to old-school point-and-click adventure titles. Devil's Hideout isn't the sort of game that hews closely to its sources until it does something with its technology that couldn't have been done 20-something years ago. With the exception of one character's design that feels very much of these modern times, this game feels like it could have been released in 1995 without feeling out of place. In fact, the method of interaction feels even older than that, with settings being conveyed in a first-person perspective, not unlike ICOM's series of McVenture titles such as Deja Vu and Shadowgate, only differentiating itself with a cleaner interface and your avatar appearing on screen when she's interacting with another character. While I'm praising the gameplay and presentation, I should also commend Cosmic Void for including a button command that highlights all the interactable hotspots in a room. Steam says it took me a little over 2 hours to reach the ending, and I'm the sort of dum-dum that would have realistically taken twice that figure without that quality of life feature. For all of that praise, however, I can pinpoint the exact moment I knew I wasn't going to be feeling this game, and that's with its first jump scare. I've muted the audio of the game here to lessen the effect, but this is accompanied by the sort of staticky scream stinger used in countless works I don't care much for when they want to convey a fright out of thin air. This isn't remotely the only cheap jump scare in the game either, as it seems some areas have floating heads accompanied by a piano saying play on your mouse cursor automatically when you enter a room, regardless of how many times you've visited the area. I'm not opposed to jump scares as a concept, but revisiting rooms to see if my newest inventory item can interact with something I've discarded, only to be met with yet another attempt at a cheap scare, does a lot to sour me on the experience. What also sours me on the experience is Lauren herself. I'll start with my pettiest grievance, and that's with what happens when you try to use an item on something the game doesn't have a programmed response for. Every adventure game must have some means of communicating that this item can't be used in this situation while dodging the nightmare of literally programming for every conceivable wrong answer, and the solution presented by Devil's Hideout involves Lauren giving a smarmy answer to the player's inquiry. Perhaps they were trying to use this opportunity to convey Lauren's disarming wit, but it comes across as condescending in practice, as though you should feel bad for suggesting the action in the first place. That this is the sort of game where you're tasked to do such nonsensical actions as spread snuff tobacco on the floor of a no-tell motel and use a hat as part of a cat trap makes Lauren's missive seem even more nonsensical in comparison. This is one time when the old standby, "I don't know what to do with that," would have been a better option. The larger problem with Lauren, however, is how she comes to be framed by the story. Spoilers ahead, click to the timecode on screen to remain unspoiled, this is your warning, 3, 2, 1. It becomes obvious early on that Lauren's attempts at getting to the bottom of what happened to her sister are assisting a dark force towards their own nefarious plans. This was my natural assumption going into this, but there's also a sequence in the first half where you're told to do something that would handicap the bad guys, and then immediately told you just help them when you complete the task. Devil's Hideout, however, moves like this dead giveaway is subtle foreshadowing, muting the impact of its later revelations, though frankly, bad foreshadowing in an adventure game's plot could be argued as being another aspect of this game's attempts at being verisimilitudinous with its influences, so it can't be too mad about it. It's Lauren's reactions to these machinations that bothers me. Not only is she comically clueless to the plot happening around her, she has seemingly no reservations about being a pawn. The obvious conflict here should be her eagerness to get answers about her sister being weighed against her investigation actively helping the villains of the story advance their plans, but there's no conflict in Lauren. Even in the final cutscene, after the villains have outright said they're about to summon a dark force on the world, if you read their holy scripture, Lauren, independent of player choice, just starts reciting the words. Point-and-click adventure games are wonderful for telling stories at an intimate, personal level, but the most we get from Lauren comes with learning she was at fault in her sister's passing, and that she set the plot of this game in motion by asking to bring her back to life. That's not nothing, but that's also not enough, not with how much potential drama could have been mined from this kind of story. There's one early sequence that hints at how good this game could have been. Lauren enters a subway and immediately says this is a dangerous place and she needs to move carefully. Plenty of adventure games use this as a tell toward their audience that they could encounter a fail state if they don't think carefully and quickly. So when Lauren gains access to the subway train and you're shown a disembodied arm drag a bloody axe across the screen, it isn't unreasonable to assume you're one wrong click away from seeing that axe up close. Plenty of horror adventure games, even lesser ones, have conjured thrills out of sequences where a fail state is on the table. And while there are some who still feel as though punishing players with a fail state for a wrong choice is not desirable, I'd argue that horror games are perhaps the most acceptable subgenre of adventure titles to punish players with a game over. How better to set the player on edge, which is much of the point of a horror game, than to threaten with the passing of their avatar. Devil's Hideout, however, has no fail states. And all this flavor text and amp tension deflated when I figured out there was no way to fail this sequence. This could be argued as fitting with the game's story, but knowing my character was never in any danger did a lot to remove any power Devil's Hideout could have had. That's really my biggest takeaway from Devil's Hideout, a game of lost potential. It isn't especially scary, the story isn't as impactful as it could have been, and the puzzles aren't anything to write home about. This is hard to recommend to adventure gamers unless you're one to respond well to titles that thrive on vibes, and even then, I'd wait for a sale. That said, it does enough right that I'm not willing to write off Cosmic Void as a promising name in this space. I didn't respond well to this game, but I can see myself giving their next adventure title a chance. Sierra, after all, didn't always hit it out of the park back in the day. Consider this a C- rather than an F. Thanks for watching the video. I'm not some video making expert and I don't have the best tools, but I did what I could with what I had. If you like what you see, consider liking and subscribing. I might make more soon. Have a nice day.